Tonight, we're in Stirling, a city steeped in history right at the heart of Scotland. Once the gateway between the Highlands and the Lowlands, Stirling is projected to have the fastest growing economy in Scotland over the next 3 years. But are local people here feeling the benefits? Tonight, people from across the city and beyond, of all political persuasions, have joined us in the medieval toll booth to have their say. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where you get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel this evening. From the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Wendy Chamberlain is the party's deputy leader and chief whip. Wendy's the MP for North East Fife and will chair her party's Holyrood election campaign next year. From Scottish Labour, the MP for Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West, Martin McCluskey. After advisory roles within the Labour Party, Martin was elected last summer and was recently appointed as a minister in the Energy Department. From the Scottish Conservatives, Meghan Gallacher is MSP for Central Scotland. Meghan was previously deputy leader of her party in Scotland and is now spokesperson for housing. Also with us tonight, business leader and entrepreneur Tim Allan. He's the founder of Motor Fuel Group, a business with more than 1,000 forecourts across the UK supplying petrol, diesel and electric charging as well. Tim is the former president of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce and current chair of the V&A in Dundee. And finally, from the SNP, Alyn Smith. Alyn was MP for this constituency until last year when Labour won Stirling at the general election. During his time at Westminster, his roles included Foreign Affairs spokesperson. He's now hoping to be elected to the Scottish Parliament next May. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. It's great to be back with you here, and you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be watching tonight in Scotland. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media to take part in the debate, and our podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started tonight in Stirling. Our first question comes from Sharon Wright. Sharon, good evening.
Was it un-British to protest in support of Palestinians last week?
Thank you, Sharon. The past week has seen pro-Palestinian protests in Edinburgh, Glasgow and other cities across the UK in the wake of the Manchester anti-Semitic attack, and also as Israel marked 2 years on from the 7th October attack where 1,200 people died. The Prime Minister said these protests are un-British. Are they, Martin McCluskey?
Thanks, Stephen. I think, firstly, to start, I think all of our hearts will go out tonight to people in Manchester and people who were affected in the Jewish community, not just in Manchester, but across the United Kingdom by what we saw last week. I think the place to start with this is really about the protests. So I understand why people are on the street every week, tens of thousands of people taking to the streets because of what they're seeing on their TV, on their smartphones, playing out day after day, night after night. Horrendous images of children being maimed, of communities and families being broken up.
But was last week the week to be doing it? That's what the Prime Minister had an issue with.
I'll come to that in one moment. So I understand why people are protesting, but I think when something like that happens, when a horrendous terrorist incident takes place, we need to pause and actually think about the actions that we take as a society. There are days, any days that people can go out and protest for any reason on Palestine or anything else. Last weekend, for example, after the Manchester terror incident, just like after many of the terror incidents we faced in this country, the Labour Party, my party, and I'm sure others on the panel suspended all campaigning that weekend. And in the same way, I think it would have been thoughtful for people to just think for a moment about whether sending that message to the Jewish community over that weekend is the right thing to do. And so, you know, was it un-British? I think it was unkind for people to be out protesting last weekend. As I said, there are ample opportunities for people to protest. I understand why people are taking that action. And we'll see tens of thousands of people out this weekend, whether that's on the streets in towns, villages, cities, whether that's protests or private, silent vigils. And that's right and fundamental to our democracy.
Thank you. Alyn Smith, were these protests this week un-Scottish?
I think the right to protest is absolutely fundamental to a free society. And there needs to be a give and take with that. There needs to be a decency about when it's appropriate to make particular things. I've been on various protests at various times, and there's a time to make that point. There's a time to let it slide. But there's a wider picture here, and what we've seen is an increasingly authoritarian edge from this UK government. And for the Prime Minister to be saying what sort of protest is un-British or un-Scottish or anything, whatever, inappropriate is against our laws and against our values, however you define your values. I think freedom of protest is absolutely fundamental. And there's a decency, and I take Martin's point as well, there's a point to be kind, and there's a point to be sensitive to other people's perspectives as well. But to hear the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom deciding what is or what is not an acceptable sort of protest, that's a really slippery slope.
But when you have the Board of Deputies of British Jews saying that they felt some of these demonstrations were gloating in the Manchester terror attack, and that made Jewish people in this country feel uncomfortable, doesn't the Prime Minister have a responsibility to speak out and take action?
I think the Prime Minister has a responsibility to uphold the law. And we have a freedom to protest, we have a freedom of assembly. That's guaranteed in law, and it's fundamental to who we are as a society. Now, I think people also need to be grown-ups and be kind and be respectful of the fact that other people have different perspectives. So, yes, absolutely. I wouldn't have been on a protest that weekend, personally. But to say that people shouldn't because it might offend people, well, that's the culture wars. And I think that's a really unhealthy debate and an unhealthy thing for politicians to be getting into.
Meghan Gallacher, were these protests over the past week un-British?
I think there's been a few good points made thus far, you know, in terms of the right to protest and, of course, what Martin said about being kind and considerate. And given that we've just marked 2 years since the 7th of October attacks, I do think it was not the right time for people to be out protesting, given the hurt that would have been felt by the Jewish community, not just because that occasion had been marked, but certainly because of what had happened in Manchester as well. I think we've got to make sure that if we're trying to bring communities together, that we're looking at it from that perspective. And I think it would have been a much better show of community had the protest not gone ahead this week. And again, if we're serious about bringing communities together, because again, when we're seeing protests, that shows division in our country. And I just think for that period, it would have been better for the protest not to have taken place.
OK, I'd like to hear from you in the audience how you feel about this. Man in the front row first.
From social media, there appears to be a few Jewish people on these marches as well. Was it wrong for them to be there?
Did you feel the timing last week was inappropriate? Was it right for the Prime Minister to say something about this?
I don't think it was right for the Prime Minister to say it. I think it was for individuals who were on these protests and on these marches, from them to think about their own self-consciousness. But bearing in mind that they are actually marching or protesting because of a far bigger event that took place and has taken place for the last few years.
Mark McCluskey.
And that's the genocide.
As I said at the outset, everyone can see what's happening in Gaza on their TVs, and this isn't about the substance of what people are protesting about. If you just take some of the protests that happened in, say, London or Manchester over the weekend, this was taking policing resource away from policing resource that could have been outside of and should have been outside of synagogues, providing reassurance to the Jewish community, for example. So we have to think about this. You've mentioned that it has to be seen in a wider context. We also have to see these protests in a wider context, which is there was pressure on the police. There was a community there in terms of the Jewish community feeling very under pressure. They have felt under pressure for a number of years, felt threatened in a number of cases. We need to make sure that they are also feeling supported. And having protests last weekend, which spread the policing resources thin, is going to make that even more difficult. This isn't an argument against, and I do slightly take objection with Alyn's point around nobody is talking about banning protest. You know, this is not an authoritarian move. Nobody's talking about
protest.
The Home Secretary's talked about restricting protests on cumulative impact.
On cumulative impact, which I think is legitimate. There might be differing views in the audience on that, but when we talk about cumulative impact, what we're talking about are people having protests in the same place, outside of the same venues, week after week after week, and that has a impact on community tension. It's an impact on just the functioning of any community as well. And this is about giving the police the power and the authority to say to a protest group, don't protest there this week, protest over here. It's not about banning protest.
OK, I'm seeing lots of hands up in the audience. So I'll come to you in just a second. But Wendy Chamberlain, is the Home Secretary right to look at tweaking the laws around protests when it comes to protests that happen again and again in the same place?
I mean, I sit here as probably the only person on the panel who has policed a protest. I have been one of those police. You too. Okay, I take it back, Tim. You know, I think the Home Secretary, in my view, is making the same mistakes as the previous Conservative government made in terms of, you know, Martin was talking there about the pressures on the police. Actually, one of the things that I experienced in my time in the police was how important the relations between those protesting and the police were in advance of the march, so that you knew what people were going to do and what the parameters were, and there was a consensual part to that. And I think the heavy-handed approach that both the previous government made with changes to public order legislation then and what the Home Secretary is talking about doing is actually going to make those relationships and that consensus much, much more difficult. And it's certainly going to be much more difficult to make things kinder, which is something that we all seem to be in agreement with. So did you have a problem
with the protests you saw last week?
I think I would agree with the majority of the panel that in relation to the fact that these protests have been going on for some time, but we have a Jewish community in the UK who do feel that they are being targeted, and obviously the terrorist attack that has happened in Manchester has increased that sense of lack of safety. I mean, I'm a Church of Scotland member. I've never thought of needing a security guard to be outside my place of worship. So I think I would have reflected, as Alyn said, that he had about whether that was right to be doing that. But we're at the moment watching what's going on in Gaza and the potential for peace. And I think regardless of whether you're protesting or not, or where you are in terms of the communities that you're working with, we actually do want to see that peace process be successful. And that's certainly something I'm hoping that we will see in the coming days.
OK. Sian, you asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to be probably quite clear in terms of, I think there's a distinction to be drawn between the actions of the Israeli government and the Jewish people.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that concerns me with the government just now is that, you know, I've always been very proud to be Scottish because I feel that we've been a country that would stand up and be welcoming to people. We were a country who would stand up for what was wrong and speak out for people who couldn't. And I feel just now the government perhaps is calling people who are protesting un-British or, you know, and by extension un-Scottish, when people are actually out there trying to stand up for what is wrong in a very scary world where we are kowtowing to some very, very scary people and we are losing rights across the piece. So I'm very proud that people will stand up for it. That does not mean I do not think what happened on October the 7th was absolutely abhorrent, that I think what happened in Manchester wasn't. But it's a scary world.
And when Jewish people in Scotland say they are scared because of what they see happening on the streets, how do you feel about that?
I have every sympathy, but I think it's up to the government also to try and be a bit more nuanced than turning around and just saying some British to protest. Or for example, why did it take 3 weeks to come out or 4 weeks to come out of the Labour Party conference and say, oh, actually, do you know that? See, waving your flag, that's a bit, you know, that's a bit racist. When it's been going on for weeks, and there are fights going on in Falkirk just now, which are horrendous. So for me, I think I'm very proud that there are people who will stand up and take a stand, and I have every sympathy, and I think it's abhorrent in all its forms in a number of places. But, you know, somebody's got to stand up and do it.
Thank you. Tim Allan, you mentioned you'd also, in serving in the British Army, you'd also police protests abroad.
Yeah, it's the only time in my life I ever got into any kind of conflict. When I was in the North Cyprus marches, the Greek displaced families tried to reach the northern Cypriot Turkish lines. I managed to get myself in the way as a young platoon commander and was ordered to remove a Greek flag planted in the buffer zone.
Back to flags again.
Yeah, and I got kicked in my privates by a very old lady as a result of it. So emotions run high in a demonstration. And it's impossible for police officers and UN peacekeepers to be able to strike that balance. Back to the question in hand. It is not un-British to demonstrate. Peterloo, the suffragettes, the Corn Laws, the Jarrow March, we've had strong tradition of demonstrating and making our feelings felt. But I think this is slightly counterproductive because what this lacks is a degree of compassion. And I think that's what I would want to see in this debate and public discourse about the incredibly emotive subjects around Gaza, what's happening out there at the moment, is can we not just show each other a bit more kindness? Mm-hmm. You've just had people murdered in a synagogue. You've just had the anniversary of the atrocities of 7th October on the backdrop of what is you know, crimes against humanity taking place in the Middle East, in Gaza. So these are emotive times. So what we need to do is somehow find amongst ourselves humanity and compassion to give each other a bit of space and respect. And one final practical point is, what is the point of a demonstration? A demonstration is to show that you have support, show that you have a cause, and to persuade others that your cause is worth it whilst you confront the policymakers. That's why we all march. Do I think that demonstrating a few days after those murders and on the anniversary of the 7th of October is going to persuade anybody? No, I don't think it is. So I think it's slightly counterproductive from that perspective. But notwithstanding your comments, the fact that people are willing to take part in these marches in order to raise these issues is a crucial part of British democracy, Scottish democracy. And God forbid that it should ever be removed from our rights.
Thank you, Tim. Get involved in this discussion, this debate from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Tonight we are in Stirling. Next week, for the first time ever, we're going to be in Lockerbie, and the week after that, we're in Glenrothes in Fife. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for either of those shows, go to the website bbc.co.uk/debate night. Back to the question. Second question of the night comes from George Manine. George, good evening.
Good evening. My question is regarding climate change. Are the costs to reach net zero worth it?
Thank you, George. Conservative conference today, Kemi Badenoch said we are deindustrialising due to the cost of energy in this country. Tim Allan, Conservatives saying the cost of reaching net zero is not worth it as far as the country is concerned. It's bankrupting the country. People here will know about the cost of energy rising as well. Is the price worth it?
Well, so this is back to this the kind of discourse we're talking about here. We're bankrupting the country. I'm not sure we're bankrupting the country. We're going to net zero. There's a balance that has to be struck. We all need to decarbonise because the climate is changing. Now, we've got our role to play in that. That's humanity is helping change the climate. I've just returned from Zimbabwe, where the temperature was normally this time of year, it's about 10 degrees lower than it was out there, and they had no rain. I mean, this is, everywhere is suffering, not just Clackmannanshire where I live, where the rainfall seems to go up every year. So we have to address decarbonisation, but decarbonisation also has a balance to be struck. We can't simply displace our obligations elsewhere. I feel quite strongly about this because my business is cars, and we are investing heavily in EV networks. But the biggest selling car at the moment, the fastest growing car sales in the UK at the moment are Chinese electric cars. Now, you and me, we're all choosing what cars we buy, so we're choosing Chinese electric cars. Chinese electric cars, BYD, don't benefit from government grants. Why is that? Because the carbon footprint of making a Chinese car is so great, it doesn't qualify under UK schemes. Yet we, as people who want to address net zero and climate change, choose with our purse to buy cheaper cars, okay? So we all have to start making choices, difficult choices. And when you talk to policymakers like these guys are all struggling to meet the demands that we have, that we need, that are calling for ourselves. So if we want to have more power generation for electric vehicles, for example, you're going to have to put turbines up somewhere. Now, that's going to be at sea, and the RSPB will be upset. It could be on your garden. You'll be upset. We need hydro. We also, because of one of the reasons that we have high costs in the UK, is we have a low baseline generation of electricity. What that means is we don't have hydro at large scale like Norway has, pouring constantly and generating electricity and storing it in the lakes. And we don't have nuclear. Our nuclear is run down to minimum state. So France has much cheaper electricity than us. Why? Because they have got nuclear. The Germans, of course, did away with nuclear after the Fukushima accident. So what did they do? They coalified faster than any economy in Europe. They created new coal-fired power stations over the last decade to fill that gap when they closed the nuclear reactors. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is a really complicated question, and we're going to have to make sacrifices and decide what we want. So climate change is a clear and present threat to humanity and to our planet. The question is, how do we strike the balance to get there? And We have to forgive these guys because they are wrestling with the same problems that you and I are. But we've got to have a consistent message from ourselves to them about what we're prepared to sacrifice to get to net zero.
Thank you. The message today at Tory conference from your national leader, very clear on this, that the price is not worth paying anymore. What do you say to that?
Well, we keep on hearing the phrase just transition. Actually, what the phrase should be is affordable transition, because I think that's fundamentally been the problem thus far with trying to meet climate targets. I mean, you see it in the Scottish Parliament, the SNP have struggled to meet their own climate targets that they have set. Why is that? Because the policies that are being brought forward are going to cost each and every one of us a lot of money to implement. And if I can take housing as an example, you've just heard from Tim regarding the sort of oil and gas petrol side of things. If I could take housing, so you've got homes that we need to decarbonise, okay? I think everyone can accept that we've got to make changes, but the homes that we've got need to be better insulated, and the government has been pushing for quite some time to have air source heat pumps stuck on the side of your house. Sounds lovely, right? Not at a cost of £14,000 to each and every one of us. So this is where it needs to come into the affordability aspect. Now, there is work being done. You know, there's been work being done within the Scottish Parliament, you know, changes to EPCs, which might make things easier for people to look at ways in which they can decarbonise their home and make that more affordable. But we are not going to get to see that until next year. So again, what the problem is that we have just now is that there's a lot of policy ideas being chewed over, but they're still not affordable for the ordinary man and woman on the street. And until we get that right, we can't continue to pursue on this direction.
McCluskey, you're an energy minister. How do we make the switch to net zero affordable for the people in this room here tonight?
So I've been in this job for 4 weeks, so quite early in the foothills of this role, so I'm not going to have all the answers this evening. Maybe if you could bring me back in a year's time, I might have more answers. But the one thing I would say about what I've discovered over the last 4 weeks is that if we slow down on the transition, it will send a signal to the world, and it will send a signal to the many private businesses that are working in this area that we're not going to carry on with what we've planned to. And the reason why we have set such an ambitious goal of clean power by 2030 and net zero by 2050 is because someone is going to win this race. Some country is going to win this race. And we saw this week, for the first time ever, we're in a situation where renewable energy is generating more than coal. In the last year, China has produced more solar than the rest of the world combined. So we can choose to sit this out, we can choose to not take part in it, but in the knowledge that we are going to get overtaken by other countries.
But you also promised the people in this room at the last election cheaper energy bills. When's that coming?
And let me come to that. So that pledge absolutely still stands and will be delivered.
When?
And on Meghan's point...
When will it be delivered?
It'll be delivered during the course of this Parliament. And on Meghan's point around affordability, we are driving at affordability by, for example, one of the things that I've got to deliver within the next 2 months is our £13.2 billion warm homes plan. So exactly what Meghan's talking about there.
Mixed technologies.
Exactly what Meghan's talking about there in terms of how we actually make sure that people can afford to upgrade their homes. It's not true that everything that we're talking about here is unaffordable. Is it? Can it be made more? Can it be made more affordable? Absolutely, yes, it can. But in Scotland at the moment, you can get a £7,500 grant, not loan, grant from the Scottish Government for a heat pump, and you can get a £7,500 interest-free loan to make this more affordable. But it's not true to say that it's not affordable for people. And when we launch the Warm Homes Plan within the next 8 weeks, £13.2 billion worth of funding to help people make this transition.
But you're still asking people to fork out thousands of pounds when they've got other cost pressures just now. And I think they're not going to choose that off their own back.
Let me just come back.
Are you going to force it on them?
No, we're not going to force it on them, but let me come back on this. Every year, thousands upon thousands of people, their boilers break down and they need to replace them. So that's the point at which we can say to people, do you want to replace with a gas boiler or do you want to get a heat pump? And if we can make that choice affordable and make a heat pump cheaper than a boiler, then that then encourages people to do that. And it is clean, it is efficient, it's sustainable, and it will bring their bills down. But what we're hearing from the Conservative Party, and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little bit impassioned about this, because I think what we're seeing from the Conservative Party around over the last few days on clean energy and around the Climate Change Act, it's not just irresponsible, it's deeply dangerous. And it's deeply dangerous for the climate, and it's deeply dangerous for all those companies at the moment who are investing in Scotland, creating jobs for people who are going to hear what you're saying and think, are we really still committed to this? We have had a consensus on this with all major parties for the last 15 years, and your party is now trying to break that
Reform
consensus.
take a very different view on this as well. Man in the audience with the purple top, yeah.
To come back to the energy side of things, I'd like to know what the Scottish Government in general are so against nuclear power or nuclear energy and gas energy. I mean, you can utilise the exhaust from gas into heating appliances, heating homes around the area. So nuclear reactors are safe as well. I mean, how many accidents do you see around the world compared to how many nuclear reactors there are? I mean, I worked on nuclear reactors on submarines, and believe you me, they are safer than a lot of other power stations. We do insist on knocking down trees, deforestation of Brazil, of Indonesia. These are all trees that produce oxygen but suck in carbon dioxide. So one hand, we're knocking down the trees for farming or whatever reason. On the other hand, we're quoted, you know, all these things about being in with the environment and net zero.
Okay. Okay. Alyn Smith, on that point, if we're trying to make the transition to net zero more affordable for people, long-standing opposition to nuclear power in Scotland from the SNP, is it time to revisit that?
No, I don't think it is. And we're not ideological on that point. We've looked at the various cost benefits of the different types of technology, and nuclear for Scotland isn't good value for money.
But the technology has changed a lot in the last 10 years.
And we're up for that. But Scotland has won the energy lottery. We have got every renewable energy in spades. And it beggars belief that Scotland, which is the most energy-rich part of these islands, has got the highest electricity prices in these islands, and indeed much of Europe. It's absurd. And this is the point about the just transition needs to be properly funded. Of course it does. And to answer the question, is net zero worth it? Yes, it is. It's existential. Bits of the world are getting drier, bits of the world are getting wetter, all of the world is getting more climatically unstable. We need to do our bit. But it's also just smart. You can't use a finite resource to move about and heat our homes when we've got other options to do that. But it needs to be affordable for people. We need to make sure that communities that are seeing wind turbines and big developments are getting proper community benefit. We need to see much more community schemes. Community Energy Scotland. I won't interrupt you, Meghan. Come on. Community Energy Scotland has come up with some really fantastic ideas which are going to be part of the upcoming election campaign. I want to see, we've got some fantastic examples in Stirlingshire. We've got Fintry has got the community-owned turbine. We've got Callander has got the pump hydro storage scheme, and that's generating clean energy, but it's also generating community benefit. So the technologies are there, but Scotland's won the lottery. It's really potentially exciting. And we need to raise our game and think a bit bigger, because as a country, we're going to need to get into this for ourselves and for the planet and for our communities.
Thank you. Man in the red top. There you go.
Alan's talking there about Scotland winning the energy lottery, and to an extent I agree with him. But with the SNP know the guys that were going to deliver a national power company that was going to give everybody in Scotland cheaper power? They've not done that.
Well, the trouble there is we're not an independent state. An independent state would be able to do a lot more. Energy policy is reserved to the UK government, which is why we've got a UK government minister here today. Scotland's responsible for some things in a devolved context. We're not independent. Now, I think the UK energy market is broken. I think Ofgem is operating to entirely their own pricing signals for new energy developments. Renewables happen where they happen. They happen at the top of hills. They happen at the top of the loch, or they happen wherever they are. If we could actually get that working properly and get away from the model that we're operating to right now, Scotland could have fantastically cheap energy, which would boost our society, which would boost our economy, which would boost everything. At the moment, the UK is delivering the highest prices for our businesses and our communities in the developed world.
But Alan, you know oil and gas will remain part of the mix for many years to come. The Conservatives say the answer to cheaper prices is, Kemi Badenoch said it today, drill for more oil and gas.
Domestic.
Which is spectacularly short-sighted. Now, I think there's a future for petrochem within the just transition. We've got to properly fund it, and we can't just go off a cliff and one thing to another. But we've got to make sure that people are involved in that and there's sufficient money in the system to actually fund the community stuff. And that's still very much work in progress, and that's where we've got a real prize that we could win for Scotland. And we could have the cheap energy that we deserve, because, look, come out of this building, you can actually see the Brazedown wind turbine. Why have we got pensioners cold in their homes in this city? we can do so much better than this. And I think an independent Scotland will be able to do so much better.
You can also see Grangemouth from just outside this building as well, which closed in April in terms of the refining capacity. Wendy Chamberlain, the question is the cost of moving us to net zero worth it?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that Meghan was talking about affordability, because from a climate perspective, I don't think we can afford not to be moving forward with what we want to do from a net zero perspective. And as Martin rightly said, just this week, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, renewables were delivering more power than coal. So it's quite clear what the direction of travel is. I find it interesting that Alyn was talking about the lottery that we seem to have won, but you know, that commitment in terms of an energy company from the SNP was not made with a qualifying statement that it would only happen if Scotland was independent. It was actually promised as a manifesto commitment and has not been delivered. So it feels like there's a squandering of the opportunity, particularly when you look at things like the bids that we've had in terms of, you know, a number of the rounds for contracts for difference, etc. I do think that the government have not been delivering what they should. But I think the bit that I found really interesting was what Tim was saying, which is about all of us and the decisions and things that we need to be making. And what the role of legislators and government is to make those decisions, to make the right decisions as easy as possible. And that's why, actually, yes, oil and gas is part of the mix going forward. We use it because we're still using petrol, diesel, we're still manufacturing plastics. But unless we change the demand profile, unless that EV charging network gets better, unless we are properly insulating homes, unless we are ensuring that new houses, when they're built, don't have a couple of solar panels on the top that wouldn't, give enough energy to charge a scooter, let alone a family car, we're not going to see the delivery that we need to see to deliver the energy savings and the energy cost savings that you and I and everybody wants to see, because nobody should be living in a cold home in Scotland in the 21st century.
OK, we keep talking about making changes here. Are you willing to make these changes? Are you making these changes, man on the front row?
We could all make changes, but how are we going to do it with the housing stock we've got? The housing stock's ancient in Scotland, and there's no way you're going to put a heat pump in the side of my house and make it warm.
And actually, that's one of the challenges. The Eco4 scheme that operates, which is for delivering improvements, has actually been a bit of a disaster, and particularly on older and more rural properties, where I've had constituents who have literally had, old buildings. Yeah, exactly. And it's that understanding, it's those standards and delivery that are so important, so that people feel confident to take advantage of grants and loans.
Man in the green top, yeah.
Doesn't the weather last week prove that we cannot depend on electricity?
Martin?
In terms of the storms last week?
Yes.
Can't win. I think there needs to be more resilience in the system. Like, absolutely, there needs to be more resilience in the system. And I know that in this area, I think as of yesterday across Scotland, there were 1,600 houses still off. And I know that this area is hit particularly hard, but that's exactly making the argument for why we need to invest in grid. Because part of the reason why when storms come along like that, we end up in the situation that we're in is because the grid doesn't have enough resilience in it.
Well, we end up compensating the wind farm owners because they have to switch the wind farms off.
And that, again, that's sort of making the argument for me. That tells us why we need to invest in the transmission network, because if we had a fully functioning grid network, we wouldn't need to be paying that, because the problem at the moment is we're paying them to turn off. They're called constraint payments when they have to turn them off, and it's only because they can't take the power from the wind turbines onto the grid because we've underinvested in the transmission
Tim Allan,
network.
is that right? Is the grid a big part of the problem?
The grid is a big part of the problem. The grid is basically over capacity. It can't function. So one of our constraints with electrifying our petrol stations, because we want you to charge your electric cars with us and buy a Costa coffee when you're there. That's what we want.
And a pasty.
A Greg's pasty or whoever is available. Others are available. However, we want you to come to our places. Of course we do. We are retailers. We want to get electric vehicles charging in there as fast as possible. So we've gone for the ultra-fast charging because we want you to fill up quickly and move on with your busy lives. However, our biggest constraint is the availability of power distribution to the grid, from the grid. And Ofgem's told us to slow down our rollout. And we're trying to spend 100 million a year on capex. We're supposed to slow it down because they can't keep up. And we say one further thing to our policymakers here. The bigger constraint than the grid is the sclerotic planning system across this country in particular. It's bad in England, it's terrible in Scotland, and it slows down our process for rolling out the EV charging points that you all want, or you say you want, yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Your views on everything here on the show. The hashtag is BBCDN if you're on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Stephen McNeil. Stephen, evening.
Thank you. Good evening. How can Scotland manage a growing benefits bill responsibly without higher taxes or encouraging long-term dependency?
Thank you. New ONS figures this week have revealed nearly 1 in 10 working-age Scots have never had a job. Meghan Gallacher, how can Scotland manage a growing benefits bill responsibly without higher taxes or encouraging long-term dependency?
Well, you've probably heard that the social security budget in Scotland has ballooned, and we're now facing a black hole, I believe, of around £2 billion. That is unsustainable, and we're going to have to look at tough choices.
£2 billion by 2030.
Yes, and again, the figure that you've rightly quoted, the 1 in 10 of us that have never had a job, well, we need to address that. But how do we address that when we've got many various different issues right across the country, from a lack of employment opportunities for young people? Again, when you're looking at apprenticeships, you've got to look at all of these things as the solutions. However, we've got a Scottish Government right now who doesn't look at the solutions, they just look at the sticking plasters approach to try and plug all of these different holes, and it's not going to be sustainable. And again, you know, with Scotland being the highest tax part of the UK, you know, for Scots, that's probably anxiety, because if they've got to plug the hole that's created by the Scottish Government, that's only going to worsen over time if the Scottish Government continues pushing their agenda instead of actually looking to the solutions for
So what are the solutions? What do we do about this?
Well, again, it's about more apprentice, more job opportunities for young people. Again, it's the push away from university. If people, you know, want to go to university, that's fantastic. But again, we have got a skills shortage right across Scotland. You know, if you look particularly in our rural communities, we need to try and encourage people to remain in those parts of the country. We need to try and make sure that the jobs are there for people to remain and grow those local economies. Because if you've got more people that are paying taxes, of course, that'll contribute more to our economy.
Of course, but for those people who are not looking for work, they're not seeking work. What about them?
Well, again, we've got to look at that. We've got to actually find out, you know, why is it that they're not working? And if there's ways and mechanisms to help them into work, then that's absolutely something that should be pursued. And I don't think that's actually, you know, an out of the ordinary idea to have. But again, that's not something I do believe that the government's focused on. And it's something that they absolutely should, and something that we've obviously stated as part of our own policies moving forward as well.
Alyn Smith, the Auditor General has said this is not sustainable. The amount of money that is being spent on benefits without plugging the gap between that and what is given in the block grant. What are you going to do about it?
Well, the big answer is to grow the economy. And that's why I think an independent Scotland within the European Union will put rocket boosters on our economic recovery. And the UK is bumping along with bad economic outcomes because of the way we left the European Union, because of the way our energy market works. And too many people are being left behind. And I'm very proud of the social security arrangements that we have in Scotland. But it is a question of, we've had austerity for so long, we've forgotten that it's austerity. We need more money into the system, more people in good jobs, making good money, paying their taxes, and looking after people who need it.
So, Alyn, those 1 in 10 people, working age people who've never had a job in Scotland, what do you say to them?
I think if somebody's never had a job, there's probably a good reason for it. And I think we need to be wary of castigating people. We need to make sure that people are looked after who need looked after, which is what Social Security Scotland's all about. But for me, we need to grow the economy. We need to get more people into good, well-paying jobs to pay taxes to fund those services.
So no tightening of welfare as far as you're concerned?
Look, the Scottish Government has to run a balanced budget. We have no deficits in Scotland. We're not allowed within the terms of the devolution settlement. So every budget has to be negotiated, and every budget's tough. And that's my point, that I think an independent Scotland could do this differently, could do this better. Getting back into the European Union, regaining the 4% of GDP that we've lost, which makes all of us poorer. All of our public services are worse off because of the way we left the European Union. And there's so many things we can do to get the, get the rocket boosters back on the Scottish economy.
Okay.
That's the answer.
Tim Allan is, hang on a second, Tim Allan is desperate to say something to you.
I'm going to say, Alyn, coming from the part of the Scottish Government, how are we going to grow the economy?
We need
rocket boosters. What are the rocket boosters?
Well, getting back into the European Union will remove all the barriers that we've got to trade.
Currently, as you know, our structural deficit is such, according to your own JERS figures, that we wouldn't converge in European Union terms to rejoin them, even if we are independent. We'd have to implement about 12 billion of cuts in order to get our deficit down to convergence in the for European Union membership. So that's pie in the sky at the moment. So let's just look at what we've got at the moment. How are we going to grow the economy? How are we going to get the 10% of our population back into workfulness? Now, I remember in the past working with Scottish Government, they said to me that 4% of the population will always be unemployed, because that was the view that the Minister had at the time. But actually, let's think about that 6%. How would you get those 6% of workless people back into work? You do it by growing the economy, I agree with you, by creating wealth. To create wealth, you don't tax your way to prosperity. You have to reduce tax and make it a more beneficial place to work. This question about growing the economy, everyone casts out that word and say rocket boosters on, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
All right, Alyn Smith.
All the major economic leaders. Now, the Scottish Government can do a lot with the powers that we have as a devolved Scotland. But all the big levers over the economy, and Tim, you'll acknowledge this surely, taxation, immigration, are all reserved at Westminster.
Well, you have some controls over taxation, Alyn.
Limited, but only on certain bits of it. And there's so much more that we could...
business rates.
Well, simultaneously, politicians are calling for more spending on more stuff, but also don't want to see taxes cut. And that's... As a party of government, we need to be responsible with that. And we need to grow the economy by getting rid of the barriers that we've got to trade with the rest of the European Union. Getting back into the EU structural funds will put millions, billions into the Scottish economy. It'll be good news for our farmers, our fishermen, for everybody else. Single market membership is so beneficial for the Scottish economy going forward. And Tim's point about JERS tell us about the status quo. I'm talking about the prize that an independent Scotland in Europe could be for our economy and our society, because the UK is delivering poor outcomes right now with the powers that Westminster has, and Scotland can do better.
OK, I want to get back to the question here, because we've moved a bit away from it. How can Scotland manage a growing benefits bill responsibly without higher taxes or encouraging long-term dependency? Man down here. Yeah.
I mean, I've not really got a solution, but I do think there's a lot of people that it's just sheer laziness for a lot of folk that aren't working. That's my honest opinion. I think they need to try and find a way to cut down how much benefits they're actually giving out, because there's people that are getting benefits that are getting more than what I actually earn each month. And that's a joke. Yeah. That's an absolute joke, because it just makes me think to myself, I'm 28 tomorrow, right? And it makes me think to myself, what's the point in me working? I could actually get more money going through the benefit system rather than work. And there's people that are fit enough to work, and there's a lot of people that are fit enough, yet there's always an excuse. There's always something that's not allowing them to work. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at more than anything. I agree with growing the economy, but you need to make sure you've got the people that are actually going out to grow it. There's a lot of folk that are completely lazy with stuff, in my opinion.
So what gets you up in the morning? What gets you out there to work, to do what you do?
I take pride in the fact that I actually do enjoy going to my work. I actually like it. And I don't want to be... I mean, I'm not going to name names, but my mum works with the DWP, sorry. She works with the pensions, the benefits and stuff like that. And you always see her coming in just totally stressed out about stuff. And I think to myself, I would never want to be that type of person where I've let my mum down, or I've let my dad down, being one of those unemployed people that is just completely lazy to no go out and work. I don't get it. That's my opinion on that, to be fair.
Thank you. With the glasses, right in the middle there. Yes.
I would ask, like you're saying, what the gentleman was saying about being people being lazy. If you're one of those 1 in 10 that's not working, being in the union or being independent isn't going to make those people wake up and say, oh, do you know what, I'm going to go to work. That's not going to do it. So I would question why or how you intend to get people in work.
Yeah. Thank you. And lady in the front down here.
I concur with that, the chap there, that in my line of work I've seen 4th generations that are on benefits now, and it's absolutely, they're saying, I've never worked, I don't have to work, because they're seeing through the generations, their parents, their grandparents have had everything. They've had holidays, they've got running cars, and they're on benefits. So it's definitely, we're in a 4th generation. And I come home from work sometimes and think, my goodness, I'm out slogging. I'm actually caring for my mum as well, working full time and caring for my mum. And I don't get any help.
So when that man was talking there, you recognise what he's saying there?
Absolutely. I recognise, I wouldn't say that people are lazy. They've just got into that rut of seeing everybody else, seeing their parents not getting up, not doing things. Definitely, they've just got into that same rut. Maybe if they had apprentices and had mentors that got them out, it maybe would make things a bit easier for them. But I don't say everybody's lazy, definitely not. But I agree with a lot that you said.
And making aspiration and opportunities for people to get on.
Mark McCluskey, Labour came in and tried to do something about this and then backed off when Labour MPs weren't happy about it.
But we're still doing a lot about the welfare state. So just to take, we've heard a lot from a lot of the panellists, I just want to kind of take this in the round. The welfare state needs to be there to support the people who need it. Like, I think most people, we'd hope everyone would accept that. It needs to be there to support the people that need it. But it should also be supporting people into work. And I think that's where, especially as we've moved to devolve benefits through the Scottish Government, we've kind of missed that second bit of the equation. So I'm sick of hearing constituents come to me who tell me that they want to be in work, but they're not being supported to get into work through the welfare system. And some of that falls on DWP, on the job centres. And from a UK government point of view, we're putting money into job centres to make sure that there's support. But a lot of that also falls on the Scottish Government now that we have devolved benefits. But I would also point to a couple of other areas that I think are really important. People who maybe have never worked or are struggling to get back into the labour market, they're struggling because they're waiting on an NHS waiting list for years. So I've got constituents who can't work because they're waiting for surgery and have been for years. Look at the colleges in this country. Like, I know that in this area, Forth Valley College are talking about closing I think it's the Alloa campus. Yeah. You know, that is a disgrace. Like, how are we going to get, Meghan's talked about apprenticeships, how are we going to get people into apprenticeships, how are we going to get people into training if we carry on as the Scottish Government have, hollowing out the college sector that was always there for people to maybe give people a second chance who didn't do the right thing at school or who enter the labour market later or maybe who fall into unemployment in their 50s and need to retrain. Systematically, a lot of these things that have underpinned the way that people get back into work have been undermined by the Scottish Government over the past 19 years. And what I would say is we've handed a lot of power over to the Scottish Government in terms of welfare and benefits, but even now we hear from SNP representatives on panels like this that the problem is Westminster. But what I would say to Alyn is the problem is the Scottish Government, and if you don't have the ideas to actually move the country on, then hand it over to someone else.
Alyn, I'll give you a chance to come back. Lady in the check jacket. Yeah, on you go.
I just wanted to sort of come back on your point. Actually, it appeared to me that some of the reforms that were getting made were focused in on sort of disability. I have a child who is old enough for that and is really frightened by some of this. And I think a lot of these people who are disabled were done it. And it struck me as if it was maybe, you're talking about other aspects, but that was maybe an easy shout, you know, to go in against these people. And that felt as if where it maybe failed in some of your reforms. So I'm just making the point that it did just seem as if you were attacking a group of people, not these ones other people have been talking about, and I've got no comment on whether that's the truth or not, but certainly there are genuinely disabled people who are living in fear.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got 500,000 Scots, I think, now take the adult disability payment. We'll come on to that in a second. Sorry, lady just behind you. On you go. Yes.
I'm just talking as an employer. I'm a business owner here. I always struggle to get staff. I have a beauty salon here. And then I always find, like, I talk to staff, why you don't want to work? You've got the skill, you know how to do nails. They say, why would we come out in winter when we're getting enough money from benefits? They don't want to work. And I always struggle to find staff because they're getting enough benefits, they don't need to work.
OK, thanks for sharing that with us. Wendy Chamberlain, what do we do about that?
Well, I think the NHS point that Martin made is a very good one, because there is absolutely no doubt that Scotland and the UK, our productivity levels have been pretty poor for some time, but there's no doubt that COVID exacerbated a lot of those issues and the challenges that we're seeing in NHS. And I've got constituents too. I've also got constituents who've waited longer for adult disability payment than they have for PIP during transfers.
But what about that lady there? She's trying to build her business, but she can't get people to work because they would rather be on benefits. What should you do about that?
Well, in terms of reducing, it's not about reducing benefits, but it's about creating new incentives. So when I was working for a drinks manufacturer before I was elected, we would work with young people to get them into the hospitality industry. And they were lacking the skills and the knowledge and the understanding to help them to do that. So there's lots of us here that don't need that support, but I think there's absolutely no doubt, particularly post-COVID, that there are some people that do, and that they've been away from the job market for too long, and that's part of the challenge. And I certainly think that's true for carers as well. We've increasingly got a sandwich generation of women my age and older who are looking after elderly relatives, and it is predominantly women. I'm not saying that men don't care, but also with younger childcare responsibilities. And we've got hundreds of people who leave the workforce every day because they can't make that juggling work, and we don't give them the support in order to be able to do that. So the NHS piece is right, and then the other bit I have to say is absolutely on colleges. It's one of the other things I did. I lectured for a year. I think the value of what further education colleges do is invaluable in terms of the skills, but again also back to those soft skills which employers often say that people don't have and don't deliver. You know, the Scottish Rural College is in Cooper, and they've just closed the animal care unit, which has been devastating for the local community. Now, the young people who do that programme aren't necessarily going to work in animal care, but they are young people who sometimes have been failed at school, it's not worked out for them, and they get the arm around them and the time that they need to get back into work and employment. But for me, it's growing the economy, it's sorting out the NHS waiting time so that those who can work are incentivised to work, and then it is about working on those skills and understanding that 1 in 10 figure. There will be people, disabled people in that, who haven't worked because they never can.
OK, interesting. Your views on everything you hear on the show. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We've got time for one final question tonight, and it comes from Maureen Clements. Maureen, evening.
Hi there. My question is, do you believe the Scottish Government is serious about the rehabilitation of offenders in Scotland, given that they've allowed prisons to become dangerously overcrowded and chronically understaffed?
Thank you very much, Maureen. Scottish Government announced an additional 440 prisoners could be released early due to overcrowding. Wendy Chamberlain, what should we be doing about this overcrowding in prisons, but also the rehabilitation of offenders when they are released?
Yes, and you know, this isn't a Scottish problem. I think it's a UK problem as well that we're seeing those challenges. We've just been talking about jobs and skills. You know, I think it's very difficult to recruit people to work in the prison sector, particularly when it's under a degree of crisis as well. We've obviously seen, you know, problems, ongoing problems with the prison estates itself, Barlinnie obviously being replaced, but these are not places, not facilities that actually seem to be built round rehabilitation. Now, whatever your views on sort of crime punishment, obviously, as we've already said before, I was a police officer, we should be believing that for the majority of people who are in prison, that we should be working to rehabilitate them so that they leave prison, one, they don't reoffend and return straight to prison, and second of all, they actually are able to be in a position where they can contribute to society. And I know work, for example, by the WISE group, I've engaged with them, who are trying to provide that, as people come out of prison, provide those degrees of support. And the reality is it's underfunding, underinvestment, and the reality is we've talked tonight about net zero, we've talked tonight about growing the economy, we've talked tonight about the NHS. As a result of that, I often think the criminal justice system ends up underserved. And that's true for policing, it's true for the prison service as well.
Alyn Smith, prison population in Scotland has risen by 14% since 2023. Are we still serious about rehabilitation in those circumstances?
Yes, we are. And I think we need to put more resource into rehabilitation of offenders, and that's happening. Not enough, I would agree. And I'm glad you mentioned the WISE group, Wendy. I think there's a lot of good work is being done in that space, but it needs better funding. But this is my point about we've had austerity for so long, we've almost got used to it. We need much more money into our public services in the round in order to better fund what we want to see happen. And we do have too many people in prison, we do. But we need to put more resource into the rehabilitation. That's happening. But it is not just a Scottish problem. There's a problem in these islands, full stop, with a lot of this stuff, because often rehabilitation of prisoners isn't the issue that gets the most money.
Alyn, thanks. We're a bit short for time here, but this is a problem south of the border as well, where prisoners have also been released.
Yeah, and Alyn talks about austerity, but the only austerity in the Scottish prison estate is coming from the Scottish Government. Now, we are having to put in place, through the UK Government for England, emergency measures. These are emergency measures for a new government that's come into place after 14 months. This is a government that's been in power for 19 years. My question would be why have you not gripped this quick enough before?
Well, there is a new prison being built at Barlinnie.
There is, but can I just talk about this? So I feel this very strongly because I represent an area that has a prison. and that prison is poorly maintained and is at risk because of the Scottish Government failing to get a grip of the spiralling budget.
Prison,
Spiralling budget at Barlinnie. £1 billion for that prison. Originally, I think the original budget was 200 million. Had that kept to budget, my prison, we wouldn't be looking at it as potentially under threat anymore. And this is the problem with the Scottish Government, not just in prisons, but a lot of the other areas that we've spoken about tonight, is that they're failing to grip the public policy problems that we've got in this country and avoiding some of the tough decisions.
Meghan Gallacher.
So on this, I mean, I think we need to look back at how this legislation was brought forward to the Scottish Parliament in the first place. It was rushed, it was a mess, and it didn't give opposition MSPs sufficient time to really look at this. Now, this is the second time the Cabinet Secretary has had to come back and announce that more prisoners are going to be released. And I think the question is, for all of us, does that make us feel safe in our communities, given that the rehabilitation services are not up to scratch? I think the point that Martin made about public services is absolutely bang on. The SNP have had 18 years to get our public services up to scratch, and they have failed. But the last point is on Barlinnie. I mean, if we don't have the buildings in which we can house prisoners in, then we're not going to be able to sustain the levels of people that will be going to jail. But I'm highly anticipating John Swinney, when Barlinnie's finally finished, with the ballooned cost for him to turn up, because to launch Barlinnie with painted on bars, because that is the out of cost, irrational approach that the SNP seem to be taking to our justice system.
We've got a minute left on this, Tim. One last thing. So when I was president of Young Enterprise Scotland, we worked extensively in Parliament with young offenders. And we could see that bringing education and programmes into prisons changes people's lives and outlooks. Now, not everyone can get changed like that. These aren't all saints. But prison doesn't work. And you can't just build more of them. You have to use the voluntary sector, the third sector, to deliver real effective change. I was so pleased we both mentioned the Wise Group. There are amongst a number of other great organisations out there doing it. We have to change our approach to offenders. It's not working at the moment.
Just briefly, Alyn Smith, is there more of an opportunity to do that, to work with other organisations to try and reduce reoffending and increase rehabilitation?
I think there is, and I think that's what we need to do, but it needs to be properly funded. And this is the point about the Scottish Government administers the money it is given from the Westminster settlement. And that's a balanced budget every year. And the budget is limited. And we need to grow our economy. We need to grow our economy much better, and an independent Scotland wouldn't do it all like this. We'd be able to grow the economy.
Alyn, thank you very much indeed. And that's it from us for tonight. Your views on everything you've heard this evening. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Next week, we're going to be in Lockerbie for the first time. Looking forward to that. Have a look on our website if you want to come along there. Or Glenrothes the following week. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a bit later on BBC One Scotland after the news. You can catch us any time on the BBC iPlayer as well. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight, and our audience in Stirling, and to you at home for watching wherever you are. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.